Hello everyone, welcome to our last video on the 12 people you love, where we talk some about the application guide. And then next week we will be talking about the new book that we'll be doing together. So we made it through. We've talked about who the 12 people you love are, why pick 12. I still kind of like the whole manageable thing. Like, instead of everyone in your life, he says find 12 people in your life, or less if you have overlapping categories. And, just pick a few people to really pour into and invest in relationally and build relationships with. So throughout the book, one of the things we've talked about is, okay, so there's a lot of why. There's a lot of why, and that's good. But where's the how? And a lot of the how that we've had to get so far, we've to some degree had to infer. And so now, though, starting in page, I believe, 61, we will begin with the how. And so the beginning of the application guide is actually an incredibly useful list.
Well, I guess we really start with my step-by-step on 58, right before the love list.
Yep.
Yeah, which is just, committing to... this idea of love and building relationships, and deciding to do it and making it into kind of a reality. I like this part, just as the short kind of thing a little bit, because a lot of things that we have, they stay ideas and we never kind of move them into reality. And this is how to do that, how to move it from just being theoretical into action.
Yeah.
You start with prayer. And then you do it. You schedule time to be with these people, and you build those relationships through time and investment. So I like that.
Yeah, and I like how it's like you have to make a decision. And I like that. Decide that you're going to let God use you in your relationships in an intentional way, because I think that there's something to that whole intentionality thing. Like Jesus likes to say, you've heard it said, don't do this. But Jesus always took those, you've heard it said, don't do this, and he'd always take it to the mind and say, well, everything starts with intention. Everything starts here. And so I think Roy Ice is doing a really good job saying, okay, well, the decision to actually love these people and actually partake in this process of discipling starts with a conscious effort, and then goes from there. So, even before prayer, which I found it very interesting, that it wasn't like, pray for God to give you the will to whatever.
Yeah.
You decide to do it, and then you pray for God to bring people to mind and to basically fill in those gaps that might be created once you decide to do it. I like that.
Yeah, and right along with that, I like that the next thing that we have on page 60 is to be intentional and consistent. Just that idea of doing these things deliberately, making them a part of your daily life.
Yeah. Because love is a choice. Love is intentional, and I think love is deliberate, or should be. And so I like that too, where he specifies. And I like writing down people's birthdays and important dates, because that's really nice when you get a text from someone, you go, oh hey, happy birthday, and you might not have been, I don't know, I think that's really nice.
Yeah. Well, and it reminds me of the best marriage advice I ever read, which was that you decide every day to love your partner, and an act of love, actions, not just a feeling, but that every day you make that decision. So it reminds me of that, that every day we can make this decision to be intentional and consistent. I like that phrasing. And the ideas are concrete, right?
Page 61, ideas.
Yeah, just some real ways to reach out to people and to build that relationship. Basically they're just making them a part of your life.
Yeah. Missing you, how's life? Thinking about you today. Sure, I'm thankful for you. You doing okay? Praying for you today, especially if the person is religious and stuff. That's always a nice thing. Oftentimes what I'll do for people is I'll say, if you'd like prayer, or if you would like me to just send positive thoughts or vibes or whatever, because sometimes people might not necessarily want the prayer part, but they do like the idea of someone thinking about them and thinking positively about or being compassionate in what they're going through.
Your sermon is ready? Okay, come on.
Yeah, read these.
Are you gonna come sit and give us your sermon?
Yeah.
Come on.
You guys go over there.
No,
yeah,
we're
in the middle
filming.
of
Yeah, we're doing it right now. You can be part of it. Okay, tell us what your sermon is.
I want to do my own cinnamon.
You want to do your own?
Sure.
Okay, you can come back and do your own later. Is that what you want?
No, I just want to please to a crowd.
Okay, that's what you're doing. There's the crowd.
The crowd's right there.
Right there.
See so people would watch it. So
Yeah. So what do you have to say?
God bless. God bless. God bless the wasps. God bless the bees. God bless the man that fell into the hands of the robbers. Amen.
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 God bless the wasps. God bless the bees. God bless the fruit. God bless the Israelites. God bless.
Thank you, buddy.
Good job, Jay. Okay, off you go. Thanks, bud.
No, it's to me.
Oh, and okay, you want us to deliver the rest of it to you? We can do that. Okay. I also like that he included some really modern 21st century kinds of ways of connecting.
Yeah.
One of the things that he was referencing is meme culture. You know, you send memes that remind you of the person to the person.
That's one of my favorite things to do right now.
Yeah, I receive a lot of them. I'm not good at the other side, but it means a lot to me when people send me things. I do it sometimes, but I don't know. I'm not as prolific, I guess, of a meme sharer as a meme receiver. But I love it. I love it when my friends send me things that reminded them of me.
Memes and gifts are always fun
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah.
Joshua, do not step on the dog, please.
Yeah, so that I liked that we had that concrete, the ideas for how to love. So that was good. And how do you want to approach then our community application guide? Because this is designed for a small group to sit around and have these discussions with each other, which it's an interesting concept, the way that it's constructed. That we start off with a set of questions that kind of reveals to us our own thoughts, and then also the way that our group is thinking about each kind of thematic thing that we're doing. And so I went through and filled them out myself, and took time on that. So how do we want to approach that?
That is a good, yeah. I want to preface with saying that if all you did was the stuff on pages 58 to 61 after reading the book, I think you would be 100% just fine. I think he gives solid advice. So, again, just to reiterate, there are some things, part of this advice list, there are some things we can do right now, there are some things we can't do right now. And I think it's good to look forward to and to plan for the things we can do once we're allowed to be together once again and be able to gather together and see friends and family. But don't use this as a reason to not do anything, because there's a lot that we can do right now to stay connected, to reach out to each other, to let people know that we care. So that's incredibly important. And I think that Roy Ice gives a lot of really good, solid things that you can do. Now, some of you might be looking through the list and might be like, oh, well, this seems really obvious and really kind of, yeah, no duh.
JJ, don't have him put his JJ.
But,
Sorry.
it's all right. Some of it might seem really obvious, but at the same time, sometimes the obvious things are easy to miss. And even with the disciples and Jesus, even with Jesus there, like the disciples missed like some super obvious things as Jesus went around and taught, right? And so sometimes we miss super obvious things too. And so I do really like how he gives very simple, very concrete things that we can do. As for the rest of the application guide, that's a more interesting conversation to have. Because I think there are some really good things in here, but I think there are also some things that we need to address. And at the very least, I like how you put it, give some content warning
Yeah.
on. Again, as with some of the things that throughout this book, I don't think that Elder Ice is intentionally doing anything malicious or wrong, or if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Let's start let's start with the parts of the application guide that we found positive and helpful for everybody to think about. I think my favorite was on page 66, beginning with the end, and he's using one of Covey's effective habits here, and that's thinking about the end work. I liked this particularly because I've had, since I was a teenager, this idea from a fantasy book that I read at the time. It's actually been a guiding life principle for me. But it's don't think about the problem, think about the solution. Because if you focus on the problem, you will never get to the solution. You'll get stuck there, bogged down, just in the work. So if you think about the solution, where you're going, and the end, then you can get through the problem. You work backwards, essentially. And I've just always found that to be wonderful life advice and kind of a guiding life principle for me. And so here we do that. And it was to describe your desired end result that we're going to see produced in our church. So I really put a lot of thought into that and wrote a response there. And I would encourage everybody else to do the same. I said that I want our church members, our church family as it exists, to become invested and active and to create kind of a church where we can create and find meaning together at Journey. And that's going to require time and effort to support our physical church and our community. And so that's what I hope doing this would bring about, right? That we would invest more in each other, in the work of the church. I loved that one of the suggestions that I wrote down was to adopt a ministry with your, especially with from your list, the people that you chose from your church members, is to work on a ministry, together, to find one to work on regularly together. I loved that. And I thought that was really wonderful. And then with that too, the idea of care and concern and carrying each other's burdens. I really liked that in that section there.
Well, that we're committing to each other, and that we make this commitment as a church family, as the body of Christ, that we support each other and uplift each other and work together side by side, and that we try to make it so that no one is doing all the work, and that everyone is, because many hands make light work, and my hope and my goal is that by the time this is all over, everyone's going to be so antsy for things to do that we're going to leap forward with some of our ideas and whatnot.
That would be wonderful,
one of the things I really liked, and one of the really positive things I got from the application guide, was sharing the blanket on page 73. Especially since I know so many people, and sometimes me, honestly, I think all of us at certain times. I like the idea of sharing the blanket because we're all too willing to be those friends in the Gospel of Mark who lower the friend down to Jesus. We're all willing to be those people that we'll lower that, we'll help that person out. But it's really hard for us to acknowledge when we need the help, when we need to be the one in the blanket being taken to Jesus. And that could be through physical concerns or economic needs. That could just be spiritual or emotional needs. It could be a wide variety of things. But we all need help sometimes in one way or another. And I know sometimes it can feel embarrassing. I know sometimes pride and whatnot gets in the way. But I love how he's like, sometimes we just have to own the fact that we're not okay. And we have to own the fact that we need help. And so I like that, where it's like, and you know what I would even go one step further here and go, allow your friends to help you. And not just your church friends, not just your believer friends, but allow your friends to help you. Even though they might not have the same religious system as you, or the same belief system or value system as you do, doesn't mean they don't have one. And it doesn't mean they don't want to help you. And it doesn't mean their help isn't valid. So I really liked this part.
Yeah. Now that does stand in direct contrast to what we both found problematic about this segment. So in chapter 2, it talks about how do we love our 3 family members. And I actually would put a content warning on this for those of you that haven't read this part yet. If you come from an abusive background with your family, skip this section. Don't read it.
Agreed.
It is highly problematic in that it is at the very least insensitive to people that have a background with their family that goes just beyond embarrassment or different belief systems or kind of that throwaway, we all have problems with our family. We don't all have problems with our family, and those problems aren't even either. And I found the content on page 70 to be insensitive at best. Because
I think it's written from the perspective of somebody who's never experienced, perhaps personally, a truly dysfunctional or abusive family dynamic.
it just reminded me too much of the many, many times I have heard a church, the church, a religious authority tell women specifically that it's their job to stay in an abusive situation. Because one of the things says that you're supposed to, the non-transactional love thing. I've heard that many, many times justify the church telling women to stay in abusive situations. And hearing that very similar, if not same rhetoric here sets off those red flags immediately. So don't do this part if you have any of that history. I would say just skip it. I don't have that history. I see. I'm already getting emotional and shaking a little bit, and I don't even have that history. And I was very upset by this because of what rhetoric like this has been used to justify in the past.
And again, we're not saying that the author is intending to be anything. But sometimes whether or not we intend to, it actually is irrelevant when it happens. And what we have to do is we have to own that, and we have to try to find a way to move forward through that. And so like for this, I'm just 100% with you. If you've come from an abusive situation or a truly dysfunctional situation, a toxic situation, it might be a good idea just to
skip it.
Just skip it.
Just skip it. The other stuff is much more helpful and direct. Anyways, I would say. Even without that background, I didn't find this chapter helpful at all. Honestly, it could have just been that I couldn't get over the rhetoric there.
But that's valid though, and I think that we have to address that. And again. If you're watching this, Elder Ice, and if you would love to talk about it, when this whole thing clears up, we'd be more than willing to go to coffee with you and talk it over. So you just let us know.
Or a Zoom meeting.
Or a Zoom meeting. Yeah, we can have some coffee over Zoom.
That's how we're all doing it right now.
Yeah. So I mean, we'd be more than welcome and willing to talk to you about it. So.
But I did like, again, going back to the positive applications. I liked on page 75 asking yourself. What you can do to become a better discipling friend. I liked that. Introspection, as Pastor Adam recently did in our sermon series on introspection and on negative emotions. Introspection is always a good idea. So I liked that, and I went through that.
And then just I like, again, the honesty about, like, having us be honest with ourselves about not knowing the answers, and are we really the type of person that should be discipling other people? The answer is obviously yes, because if you've been called by Christ, of course, yes. And God can work through all of it, and you can work through all of it. So I kind of like that whole, like, even if I don't have the answers, I can still do something. Even if I'm not, like, the most read in the Bible, or pray the most, or am the best, person when it comes to following rules and stuff, I still have something to contribute and share because God has still called me. And I don't know, I just really like that idea.
So I think that was about it from kind of what we got out of the community application guide.
One thing I would like to say, though, when it comes to the church members, I think that the love assumes part, I would almost argue, not quite take it with a grain of salt, but I would say that I hear, not as strongly as in the previous section, but I think that thinking the best of people is one thing. And I think that love can look at people, and love can recognize that people are complicated, and life is complicated, and things are messy. We get that, and we can have compassion and forgiveness, absolutely. But we have to be careful with this, like a section like this, because we oftentimes use this saying, oh, like, let me just read it real quick. We must assume that the iron-fisted control freak who resists all proposed change has good intentions. We must assume that all the hard-shelled, grumpy old codgers have a soft, gooey inner core. No, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And especially when their actions are hurting people, and their actions are driving people away from the church and driving people away from Christ, we can't assume those things. And I don't think love asks us to assume those things. I think that love asks us to work with them, especially as clergy. Love helps us to seek them and help to, bring Christ into their experience, because oftentimes Christ is not in their experience, even if they think Christ is, when they're bringing harm to themselves and others.
I think that's the main thrust of our problem with that particular section, though, is that the love assumes, again, has a lot of rhetoric in it that sounds like a lot of things that we've heard before, where someone in the church is actively harming people. Just actively hurting people and driving them out of the church. But then we hear from church authorities that we're supposed to just accept this person as they are, as though that person's salvation or place in the church is more important than all the people they're driving out.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable. And so, while yes, the positive side of this is love everyone, try to see
the good in people.
The good in people, absolutely. You don't use it to justify letting people hurt other people.
Yeah.
You stand between. You don't allow that to happen.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to do this might be too soon, but quarantine people. Sometimes for the sake of the body and for the sake of those that you're trying to bring to Christ, you have certain individuals that need Christ too and need to be there, but we have to be careful to limit their influence in order to prevent driving people away from church and from Christ. So honestly, when it comes to, I think I'm with you. When it comes to the application guide, first off, just read 58 to 61.
Yeah.
You read 58 to 61, you have some really solid places to start. I think it's great. A lot of the good, solid points that he makes in the application guide, he makes in the earlier
elsewhere,
chapters.
yeah.
So
Without the problematic
stuff,
nature
yeah.
of it, yeah. Yeah.
But then number 6, I think number 6, chapter 6 of the application guide, how do we make this a way of life? And so I kind of think that this is where I kind of want to, the note we could end on.
Yeah.
Is I like how he says, finding the people we love and discipling the people we love becomes a way of life, becomes a way of doing things. It's not just, this is what this season we're doing this, like, it's not a fad or a trend or a new diet that we're on. This is a lifestyle change, and a love style change. And so I really like that idea where you take the ideas of this, which I don't think he'd be upset, are basic, but easily overlooked, right? But I like how he takes, I think he takes a concept that we all too often overcomplicate and puts it into nice, manageable chunks for us to work with. And then says, now we live it. We don't just do it, we live it. And when we live it, it becomes part of our lifestyle, then it becomes more lasting and more real and more natural.
Yeah, well, and I think that's, I think the always been kind of at the core of our ministry efforts is always love. And like we kept repeating as we've gone through this whole book, love is the truth and love is the doctrine.
Yes. Love is the core of reality.
Yeah.
Right? And so everything should come back to that.
And just if we were to make that the center of our lives, our ministry, our relationships, just that would transform your immediate world and then the world of the people that you love too. That's.
So overall, I think that this has been a good experience. Now, I want to make sure that I don't know if caveat's the right word, but I think that one of the best parts of being in this and one of the best parts of living life together is this ability to dialogue, and even with critique and even with concern. And so there are certain parts of this that we found problematic. Again, not intentionally, but we found problematic. And there are certain parts of it that we found were fantastic. And I like that. I like that and I would love open dialogue with the author on this, because that's how things happen, right? That's where the really good theology happens, is through dialogue and conversation. So overall, that's why we wanted to do this book with you, is that we found a lot of valuable information here, a lot of really good stuff to do, and stuff that we can do right now while we're in the middle of this, and perhaps something that can help get your mind off things, something that can help focus us in more positive directions. Like, for example, I'm making a habit now of not checking the news right when I wake up, because
Solid habit. Don't do that. Bad for your mental health.
especially right now, it's not great.
Yeah.
So things like that, like what are some positive things, good things that we can do during this time? And finding 12 people to love on and then loving on them, I think is a fantastic use of time and resources right now during the time of COVID. Is there anything else you'd like to add, baby?
Well, I hope that you'll join us next week when we're going to have a general conversation about what we're reading as we choose our next text that we hope you guys will go through with us. We haven't chosen one yet. We have a couple of options that we're looking at.
If there's a book that you want to go through and you have suggestions, feel free that in the comments or on Facebook you can hit us up, or you can hit me up, or you can send an email to journeysda at gmail.com. And you can let us know if there's a book that you would like to go through, and we can take that into consideration as we think and plan before our next video.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, just remember that God loves you very much. Remember to love each other, and remember that we at Journey SDA love you, and no distance can change that.